The mahogany doors of Sterling Industries' executive suite swung open with practiced precision, revealing Jasmine Carter in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that spoke of authority earned, not inherited. Her natural hair was pulled into an elegant bun, her brown eyes sharp and assessing as she took in the opulent conference room. At 42, she'd clawed her way from Detroit's east side to the CEO's chair of one of the nation's fastest-growing green energy firms, and every step of that journey had taught her to read a room before anyone spoke a single word. What she saw now made something tighten in her chest. The Whitmore family, arranged around the table like royalty holding court, their expressions ranging from polite disinterest to barely concealed condescension. And this $900 million partnership could revolutionize sustainable energy infrastructure across the Midwest. But the weight of their collective gaze told her this meeting would be about far more than business. Now, before we continue with what happens in that room, and trust me, what unfolds will shock you, I need to ask you something. You're here, watching this story, which tells me you love tales of justice, redemption, and people standing up for what's right. But here's the thing that honestly breaks my heart. 90% of you watching right now haven't hit that subscribe button. Think about that. You're enjoying these stories, feeling these emotions, connecting with these journeys, but you're not part of our community yet. That needs to change today. Right now, pause for just 2 seconds and click that subscribe button. It's free, it takes no time, and it means you'll never miss a story that might be exactly what you need to hear. And while you're at it, hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. Then do me a favor and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Georgia, New York, Manchester, Netherlands, Texas? I want to know where my Folktales Passage family is tuning in from. Let's build this community together, because stories like Jasmine's deserve to be heard, shared, and remembered. Now let's get back to that conference room, because what happened next changed everything. Jasmine set her leather portfolio on the table with deliberate care, her movements measured and professional. Across from her, Richard Whitmore III, silver-haired, 60-something, us with the kind of tan that came from yacht decks rather than construction sites, leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. To his right sat his wife, Victoria, dripping in diamonds that probably cost more than Jasmine's first house, her expression fixed in what might generously be called a smile, but looked more like someone smelling spoiled milk. Their son, Richard IV, Trey to his country club friends, was scrolling through his phone with the kind of boredom that suggested this meeting was keeping him from something far more important, like his golf game or his third martini of the afternoon. "Ms. Carter," Richard began, not bothering to stand or offer a handshake. "I'll be honest with you. When my assistant told me Sterling Industries wanted to pitch us on this solar infrastructure project, and I assumed I'd be meeting with your CEO." He paused, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "I didn't realize you were..." "Well, I didn't realize." Jasmine kept her expression neutral, though her pulse quickened. 20 years in corporate America had given her a doctorate in coded language. "I am the CEO, Mr. Whitmore. Sterling Industries is my company. I founded it 12 years ago with a business loan and a vision for sustainable energy solutions that actually work for communities that need them most." Victoria's laugh was light and airy, like wind chimes in a storm you didn't want to be caught in. "How ambitious. Richard, darling, didn't we just read something about this in that Urban Entrepreneurs feature? What was that publication called?" She turned to Jasmine with exaggerated curiosity. "Was that you? Well, the feel-good story about overcoming obstacles." The words hung in the air, sweet as arsenic. Jasmine had spent enough time in rooms like this to know when she was being sized up, measured, and found wanting before she'd even opened her mouth about megawatts and infrastructure. But she'd also spent enough time building something real, something that mattered, to let other people's small thinking make her small too. "I don't know which article you're referring to," Jasmine replied evenly, "but I'd love to tell you about Sterling Industries' actual track record. We've completed 47 major projects across 8 states in the last 5 years alone. Our solar installations have reduced energy costs for over 300,000 households, with a 98% satisfaction rating and a safety record that exceeds industry standards by 40%. The infrastructure partnership I'm proposing would bring sustainable, affordable energy to underserved communities throughout the Midwest. Communities your family's foundation claims to support, based on your public statements. She pulled out her tablet and began setting up the presentation. But Trey's voice cut through the room like a rusty knife. Look, lady, I'm going to save everyone some time here. My father's company doesn't do business with operations like yours. We work with established firms, real players, people we know. Jasmine's finger paused over the tablet screen. Operations like mine? Could you clarify what you mean by that, Mr. Whitmore? Trey barely looked up from his phone. Come on. You know what I mean. This whole thing screams diversity hire, some government grant project, affirmative action nonsense. My father built Whitmore Development with actual hard work, not handouts. The silence that followed was volcanic. Jasmine felt the heat rising in her chest, that familiar fire that had fueled every mile of her impossible journey. She thought about her father, working double shifts at the automotive plant until his hands bled, saving every penny so she could go to college. She thought about her mother, cleaning houses in Grosse Pointe while studying for her nursing degree at night. She thought about the banks that had laughed her out of their offices, the investors who'd told her to be realistic about her goals, the conferences where she was mistaken for catering staff, even with her CEO badge clearly visible. Actually, Jasmine said, her voice quiet but sharp enough to cut diamond, my company was built with a $200,000 business loan that I qualified for based on my MIT engineering degree and my 5 years of experience at General Electric's Renewable Energy Division, where I led a team that revolutionized solar panel efficiency. I paid that loan back in 3 years. Everything since then has been profit, growth, and the kind of innovation that apparently your research team failed to brief you on before this meeting. Richard held up a hand, his smile patronizing. Now, let's not get emotional. I'm sure you've worked very hard. It's just that Whitmore Development has certain standards, certain expectations about who we partner with. This is a $900 million deal we're discussing. That's serious money. Well, we need to know we're working with serious people who understand how things really work in this industry. How things really work, Jasmine repeated slowly. You mean how the Whitmore family has held the monopoly on Midwest infrastructure contracts for 3 generations because your grandfather golfed with the right senators? How your company has been cited 17 times for environmental violations in the last decade, but somehow those fines always disappear? How you've been sued 8 times for discriminatory hiring practices, but settle out of court every time with NDAs attached? That's how things really work? Victoria's face flushed red. How dare you come into our office and— This is my office, Mrs. Whitmore, Jasmine interrupted, her voice still calm but her eyes blazing. You're in Sterling Industries headquarters. I agreed to this meeting as a courtesy because your husband called my assistant 6 times claiming he wanted to discuss a revolutionary partnership opportunity. I cleared my schedule, prepared a comprehensive proposal, and showed up ready to do business. Professional business. Richard stood up, his face darkening. I think we're done here. This was clearly a mistake. Whitmore Development works with established, reputable firms, not some flash-in-the-pan operation run by someone who doesn't understand her place. There it was, the words he'd been dancing around since she walked in the room. Jasmine stood too, gathering her materials with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the rage and hurt warring inside her chest. This was the moment she'd been preparing for her entire life, even though she'd prayed it would never come. This was the moment when she had to choose between making them comfortable and honoring the truth of who she was and what she'd built. My place, Jasmine said softly, is at the head of a company that does more real good in a single quarter than your family's foundation has done in its entire existence. My place is solving problems you don't even understand exist because they don't affect people who look like you or live where you live. And my place, as of right now, is walking away from this meeting with my dignity, my integrity, and my $900 million proposal that would have made your company relevant again. She snapped her portfolio shut and walked toward the door, each step measured and deliberate. Behind her, Trey's voice dripped with mockery. Good luck finding anyone else to fund your little project. Well, everyone in this industry talks. Word gets around about people who don't know how to play the game. Jasmine paused at the doorway, looking back at the three of them sitting in judgment like they were doing her a favor by breathing the same air. Mr. Whitmore, I've been underestimated my entire life. By teachers who said engineering wasn't for girls like me, by bankers who said I should try something more realistic, by investors who told me to smile more and be grateful for their consideration. Every single one of them learned the same lesson you're about to learn. Underestimating me is the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. The elevator ride down from the 14th floor felt like descending from a fever dream. Jasmine's reflection in the polished steel doors showed a composed, professional woman. But inside, she was that 8-year-old girl in Detroit again, watching her mother cry over bills she couldn't pay, promising herself that one day she'd have enough money, enough power, enough respect that no one could make her mama feel small ever again. She'd kept that promise. She'd built something remarkable. And these people, these self-appointed gatekeepers of success, had reduced it all to nothing in their minds because of the color of her skin. Her assistant, Maya, looked up anxiously as Jasmine emerged from the elevator. "How did it go?" Jasmine managed a tight smile. "About how we expected. Call Devin and tell him to set up a meeting with the Sterling board for tomorrow morning. We're moving forward with Plan B." "Plan B?" Maya's eyes widened. "But that means—" "It means we're doing this ourselves," Jasmine said firmly. "No partners. No compromises. We're going to show everyone exactly what Sterling Industries is capable of when we're not wasting time trying to convince small-minded people that we deserve a seat at the table we built." That night, alone in her corner office overlooking downtown Detroit, Jasmine allowed herself 15 minutes to feel everything she'd been holding back. The anger, the hurt, the exhaustion of constantly having to prove her humanity before she could even discuss her qualifications. Then she pulled up her files and got to work. If the Whitmores thought they were the only game in town, they were about to learn how thoroughly they'd misunderstood the board. 3 weeks later, Jasmine was halfway through her morning coffee when Maya burst into her office, her face flushed with excitement. "You need to see this. Right now." The news article on Maya's tablet made Jasmine read the headline 3 times before she believed it. "Whitmore Development faces federal investigation for fraud and environmental violations." She scrolled through the article, her heart pounding. Anonymous whistleblower. Documents showing systematic fraudulent billing on government contracts. Evidence of deliberate environmental regulation violations. Kickback schemes. The kind of exposure that didn't just damage a company, it destroyed it. "There's more," Maya said, swiping to another article. "The Midwest Infrastructure Coalition just announced their opening bidding for the Regional Sustainable Energy Contract. The one the Whitmores had locked up, $900 million. And then guess whose proposal is suddenly looking very attractive to the selection committee?" Jasmine sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She hadn't made the whistleblower report. She didn't need to. The truth had a way of surfacing eventually, especially when people got arrogant enough to think they were untouchable. But this opportunity, this chance to step into the exact space the Whitmores had tried to bar her from, felt like the universe rebalancing itself. "Get Devin on the phone," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "Tell him we're updating our proposal for the coalition. And Maya, make sure it's perfect, not because we have anything to prove, but because those communities deserve the best we can give them." The Sterling Industries team worked around the clock for the next 2 weeks, refining their proposal until it sang. Jasmine personally reviewed every page, every projection, every community impact study. This wasn't about revenge. This was about showing up fully, powerfully, undeniably in her purpose. The Whitmores had tried to make her small. She was going to respond by being bigger, bolder, and better than they'd ever imagined possible. The morning of the presentation arrived with October sunshine streaming through the windows of the coalition's downtown headquarters, a historic building that had witnessed decades of deals that shaped the Midwest infrastructure. Jasmine arrived an hour early, as she always did, giving herself time to walk the space, breathe the air, center herself in the magnitude of what this moment meant. Not just for Sterling Industries, but for every young black girl in Detroit who'd been told to dream smaller, aim lower, and take up less space. Her heels clicked against marble floors that echoed with the footsteps of men who'd walked these halls before her, men who'd never had to prove they belonged because their belonging was assumed, inherited, unquestioned. She thought about her grandmother, who'd worked as a domestic worker in Birmingham during Jim Crow, who'd hidden her intelligence behind yes ma'ams and lowered eyes because survival demanded it. 3 generations later, here stood Jasmine, about to pitch a $900 million infrastructure project on her own terms. The presentation room filled with coalition members, city officials, state representatives, environmental advocates, and financial analysts whose job was to find flaws in proposals that looked too good to be true. Jasmine set up her materials with practiced efficiency, acknowledging each person with a nod and a genuine smile. She'd learned years ago that authenticity was her superpower in rooms full of people performing versions of themselves they thought others wanted to see. She caught sight of Devin in the back, her CFO, and one of the first people who'd believed in her vision when it was just sketches on napkins and spreadsheets that didn't quite add up yet. He gave her a subtle thumbs up, his dark face creased with the kind of pride that transcended professional partnership. They'd built this together, him and her and Maya and the whole Sterling team, people who'd chosen purpose over paychecks, mission over comfort, excellence over excuses. "Good morning, everyone," Jasmine began, her voice clear and confident without being aggressive, warm without being soft. "Thank you for this opportunity to share Sterling Industries' vision for sustainable energy infrastructure that doesn't just serve communities, it transforms them. Over the next 45 minutes, I'm going to show you how we can deliver the most comprehensive, cost-effective, environmentally responsible energy solution in the Midwest's history. And I'm going to tell you about the people whose lives will be changed by what we're proposing here today." She clicked to the first slide, and the room fell silent as data began to paint a picture. Not just megawatts and cost projections, but stories of communities living in energy poverty. Neighborhoods where families chose between heating and eating every winter. Schools where outdated infrastructure meant kids studied in darkness when the power failed. Jasmine had spent months in these communities, listening to grandmothers and single mothers and factory workers and teachers. She'd sat in living rooms and community centers, asking questions that no other energy company had bothered to ask because they were too busy looking at spreadsheets to see actual human beings. "This isn't just about installing solar panels," Jasmine continued, warming to her subject. "This is about energy justice. This is about recognizing that access to reliable, affordable, clean energy is a fundamental human right, not a luxury for those who can afford it." Sterling Industries has spent 12 years perfecting a model that combines cutting-edge technology with community partnership. We hire locally, we train locally, we invest in the communities we serve so that when we leave, and we're not just leaving behind infrastructure, we're leaving behind opportunity, skills, jobs, and hope. One of the coalition members, an older white man with kind eyes named Thomas Brennan, leaned forward. "Ms. Carter, your numbers are impressive, but they're significantly lower than other bids we've received. How can you deliver this scope of work at this price point while maintaining quality and safety standards?" Jasmine smiled, grateful for a genuine question instead of a veiled attack. "Excellent question, Mr. Brennan. The answer lies in our supply chain innovation and our commitment to efficiency over excess profit margin. Sterling Industries manufactures 60% of our components in-house at our facility in Flint, Michigan. A facility that, by the way, he employs 347 people in a city that desperately needed those jobs. We've eliminated the middleman markup that traditional contractors rely on. Additionally, our project management system, which I developed based on lean manufacturing principles I learned at GE, reduces waste and timeline overruns by an average of 32%. We're not cutting corners, we're cutting inefficiency." Another coalition member, a Black woman named Patricia Owens, who represented environmental advocacy groups, spoke up. "I've reviewed your environmental impact studies, and I'm impressed by your commitment to not just reducing carbon footprint, but actually improving local ecosystems through your installations. Can you speak to how you've achieved results that exceed EPA standards by such significant margins?" This was Jasmine's favorite part, talking about the innovation that kept her up at night with excitement instead of anxiety. "Absolutely. Our solar panel systems include integrated rainwater capture and filtration that actually helps restore local water tables. In every community we've worked in, we've seen measurable improvements in soil quality, local vegetation, and even wildlife populations returning to areas they'd abandoned due to industrial pollution. We view our installations as healing interventions, not just energy solutions. Mother Earth has been carrying the burden of our carelessness for too long. Our technology is designed to give back more than it takes. For 90 minutes, Jasmine fielded questions with the kind of expertise that came from living and breathing her work every single day. She cited studies from memory, pulled up data visualizations that made complex concepts accessible, shared testimonials from community members whose lives had been changed by Sterling's previous projects. She was in her element, doing what she was born to do, and everyone in that room could feel it. This wasn't a sales pitch. This was a calling, a mission, a purpose being articulated by someone who dedicated her life to making it real. As the presentation concluded, Jasmine looked around the room and saw something she'd rarely experienced in her career. Respect that had nothing to do with her having to prove herself and everything to do with her work speaking for itself. "I want to close by saying this," she said softly. "Why 3 weeks ago, I sat in a meeting where I was told that Sterling Industries wasn't good enough, wasn't established enough, wasn't the right fit for this kind of partnership. Those words hurt, I won't lie, but they also reminded me why I do this work. I do it for every person who's been told they're not enough. I do it for communities that have been overlooked and underserved for generations. I do it because excellence is my birthright, not something I have to beg permission to demonstrate. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your commitment to choosing the best solution for the communities that need it most." The room erupted in applause, genuine, enthusiastic appreciation that made Jasmine's eyes sting with unexpected tears. She blinked them back, maintaining her composure as coalition members approached to shake her hand and ask follow-up questions. Thomas Brennan pulled her aside, his expression serious. "Ms. Carter, I want you to know that I've been on this coalition for 15 years, and I've never seen a proposal as thorough, innovative, and community-focused as what you've presented today. I also want you to know that I'm aware of your meeting with the Whitmores 3 weeks ago." Jasmine's stomach tightened. "I see. Richard Whitmore and I golf at the same club," Thomas continued. "He called me the day after your meeting, trying to poison the well against Sterling Industries. Said some things about your company, about you that were—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say they revealed more about his character than yours. And I told him then what I'm telling you now. His era of controlling infrastructure through backroom deals and old boy networks is over. Excellence wins. Innovation wins. Integrity wins. And Ms. Carter, you represent all three." The official decision came 2 weeks later. Sterling Industries had won the contract, all $900 million of it. The largest single deal in the company's history. Jasmine was in a community meeting in Flint, talking to residents about a smaller local project when Maya's call came through. She excused herself and stepped outside into November wind that cut through her coat like prophecy. "We got it," Maya said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Jasmine, we got it. The coalition voted unanimously. They said our proposal was exactly what the region needs." Jasmine leaned against the brick wall of the community center, letting the news wash over her like baptism. She thought about the Whitmores, sitting in their mansion, reading the same news. She thought about Trey's mocking voice, Richard's condescension, Victoria's poisonous sweetness. She thought about every moment in her life when someone had tried to make her question her worth, her capability, her right to take up space in rooms where she'd earned her seat. And she thought about her father, gone 5 years now, who'd never lived to see this moment, but who'd believed in it with every fiber of his being. "We did it," Jasmine whispered. "Maya, we actually did it." The celebration that night at Sterling Industries headquarters was joyful chaos. Employees dancing, champagne flowing, grown men and women crying with the release of years of hard work finally being recognized. Devin found Jasmine on the roof deck, where she'd escaped for a moment of quiet reflection under Detroit's city lights. "You okay, boss?" "I'm thinking about what to do next," Jasmine admitted. "The Whitmores don't know yet that we won the contract. I could call them. I could send a press release. I could enjoy watching them find out through the news. But none of that feels right, Devin. None of that feels like who I want to be. Devin nodded slowly, his breath misting in the cold air. You've never been about revenge. That's not your style. So what is? Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, watching the city that had raised her, broken her, made her, and believed in her even when she struggled to believe in herself. I want to invite them to see what they missed out on. Not to gloat, not to rub their faces in it, but to show them what partnership could have looked like if they'd been willing to see past their prejudices. I want them to understand what they lost when they chose smallness over possibility. That's very evolved of you, Devin said with a slight smile. Also possibly sadistic in the best way. Maybe a little of both, Jasmine admitted. But mostly I want to model something different. The cycle of hurt people hurting people has to stop somewhere. Why not here? Why not with me? What if instead of becoming bitter, I become better? What if I show them grace they didn't show me? Not because they deserve it, but because I deserve to be free from the weight of carrying anger around? 3 days later, Jasmine sat in her office composing an email that took her 2 hours to write. Dear Mr. Whitmore, it began, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to personally inform you that Sterling Industries has been awarded the Midwest Infrastructure Coalition's Sustainable Energy Contract. I know we didn't part on the best terms at our last meeting, but I believe in the power of second chances and new beginnings. I'm extending an invitation for you and your family to visit one of our community project sites in Flint next month. I'd like to show you the work Sterling Industries does and the impact we have on communities. No business agenda, no ulterior motives, just an opportunity for understanding and perhaps reconciliation. The offer stands if you're interested. Respectfully, Jasmine Carter. She hovered over the send button for a full minute before clicking it. Maya, reading over her shoulder, shook her head in disbelief. You're a better person than me. I would have sent them a fruit basket with a note saying, thanks for the $900 million. Enjoy your fraud investigation. Jasmine laughed despite herself. That's why you're not the CEO. That's why you're the CEO, and I'm the assistant who keeps you sane, Maya corrected. Do you really think they'll respond? Honestly, no, Jasmine admitted. But I'll sleep better knowing I tried. That's worth something. The response came faster than Jasmine expected. A curt two-line email from Richard's assistant stating that Mr. Whitmore was too busy to accept her invitation, but wished her well on the project. Jasmine read it twice, one feeling the dismissal like a door closing. She'd extended the olive branch. They'd snapped it in half. The knowledge settled something in her chest, a final release of any remaining doubt about who these people were and what they valued. But 3 weeks after that, on a gray December morning, when frost painted patterns on her office windows, Jasmine received a call from a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, younger, hesitant, nothing like the Whitmores' affected aristocratic tones. Ms. Carter, my name is Sarah Whitmore. I'm Richard Whitmore's daughter, his youngest daughter. You've probably never heard of me because I'm not involved in the family business. I'm a social worker in Chicago. I read about your company winning the coalition contract, and I read the email you sent my father. He deleted it, but I saw it in his trash folder when I was using his computer over Thanksgiving. Ms. Carter, I need to talk to you about my family, about things you should know, things that might help you understand why they treated you the way they did. Not to excuse it. What they did was inexcusable, but to give you context. Would you be willing to meet with me? Jasmine's mind raced. A daughter she'd never heard about. A social worker, not a businesswoman. Someone reaching across the divide that her family had created. Every instinct told her this could be a trap, a manipulation, another game. But something in Sarah's voice, a vulnerability, a genuineness that couldn't be faked, made Jasmine pause. Where and when? Jasmine asked. The coffee shop Sarah chose was deliberately neutral territory, a small place in Ann Arbor, halfway between Detroit and Chicago, filled with university students hunched over laptops and the comforting hiss of espresso machines that masked private conversations. Jasmine arrived 15 minutes early, positioning herself at a corner table where she could see the entrance. A habit born from years of walking into rooms where she wasn't sure if she'd be welcomed or tolerated. She ordered chamomile tea she didn't drink, watching the door with the kind of vigilance that came from a lifetime of protecting herself from disappointment. When Sarah walked in, Jasmine recognized her immediately, not from any family resemblance to the Whitmores she'd met, but from the way she carried herself, shoulders slightly hunched as if apologizing for taking up space, eyes scanning the room with anxious hope. She was younger than Jasmine expected, maybe 28, with dark hair pulled into a messy bun and wearing a worn pea coat that had seen better winters. Nothing like the designer clothes Victoria and Trey had worn like armor. Sarah spotted her and crossed the cafe with uncertain steps, her hands twisting the strap of her canvas bag. "Ms. Carter, thank you so much for meeting me. I know this must seem strange, and I wouldn't blame you if you got up and walked out, but I'm grateful you're giving me this chance." She slid into the chair across from Jasmine, her eyes hazel, warm, nothing like her father's cold blue stare, meeting Jasmine's with disarming directness. "I'm going to be completely honest with you because you deserve nothing less. I'm the black sheep of the Whitmore family, the disappointment. The one they don't mention at country club dinners because I chose social work over business, because I work with refugees and homeless populations, because I married a man they deem beneath our station, because I've spent my entire adult life trying to atone for the harm my family's money has caused." Jasmine studied her carefully, looking for the trap, the angle, the manipulation she'd learned to expect from people with the Whitmore name. But what she saw was exhaustion, sincerity, and something that looked painfully like shame. "Why are you here, Sarah? What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Sarah said quickly. "I don't want anything except to tell you the truth about my family, and to apologize on behalf of a family that will never apologize for themselves." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through it with trembling fingers before turning it to show Jasmine a photograph. "This is my grandmother, Elizabeth Whitmore, my father's mother. She died when I was 16, but before she passed, she told me stories about the family that no one else would tell. About how my grandfather built Whitmore Development during the 50s and 60s by exploiting black workers, paying them half what white workers earned for the same jobs. About how he deliberately destroyed black-owned construction companies by underbidding them and then buying their equipment at bankruptcy auctions. About how the Whitmore fortune was built on the systematic exclusion and exploitation of people who look like you." Jasmine's throat tightened. And this wasn't new information. She'd suspected as much from the moment she'd researched Whitmore Development's history, but hearing it spoken aloud by someone from inside the family was different. It made the invisible visible, the suspected confirmed. Sarah continued, her voice thick with emotion. "My grandmother was horrified by what she'd been complicit in. She spent the last decade of her life trying to make amends, donating to civil rights organizations, supporting black-owned businesses, funding scholarships. But she did it quietly because my grandfather threatened to cut her off completely if she embarrassed the family. After she died, I found her journals, pages and pages of regret, of recognition that she'd benefited from a system designed to crush people like you. She wrote that she hoped one day a reckoning would come, and that someone with courage and integrity would rise up and show the Whitmores what excellence really looked like." Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Miss Carter, I think that someone is you." "Why are you telling me this?" Jasmine asked softly. "Your family would disown you if they knew you were here." "They already have, mostly," Sarah said with a sad smile. "I haven't been invited to Christmas dinner in 4 years. My father sends me birthday cards with checks that I donate to charity because I don't want his money. My mother pretends I don't exist when I run into her at family funerals. The only Whitmore who still talks to me is my Uncle George, my father's younger brother, and that's because he's been trying to reform the company from the inside for 20 years with no success." She leaned forward, her intensity palpable. "And I'm telling you this because you extended kindness to people who mocked you, because you offered reconciliation to people who tried to humiliate you, because that email you sent my father, that was grace he didn't deserve and couldn't recognize. But I saw it, and I thought you should know that there's someone in the Whitmore family who sees what you're doing, who admires it, and who wants to be part of making things right instead of perpetuating the same old patterns of harm." Jasmine felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. This young woman with her earnest face and worn coat, bearing witness to her family's sins in choosing a different path. She was proof that cycles could be broken, that consciousness could evolve, that people could choose differently than their raising had prepared them to choose. "What happens now?" Jasmine asked. "What are you hoping for from this conversation?" "Honestly, I hoped you'd let me volunteer at one of your community projects," Sarah said. "I'm a licensed social worker with experience in community development. I don't want money. I don't want recognition. I just want to do something useful, something that contributes to fixing the systems my family broke. And selfishly, I want to learn from you. I want to see what it looks like when someone leads with integrity instead of ego, when someone builds something that actually serves people instead of extracting from them." Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, sipping her cold tea while her mind worked through possibilities and implications. Every cautious instinct told her to decline, to keep her distance from anything connected to the Whitmore name. But her heart, that part of her that had somehow survived decades of disappointment without hardening completely, recognized something genuine in Sarah's plea. "I'll make you a deal," Jasmine said finally. "Come to Flint next Wednesday. I'm doing a community meeting for our new project there. Sit in the back, listen, watch, see what Sterling Industries actually does. If after that meeting you still want to be involved, we'll talk about what that might look like. But I need you to understand something, Sarah. If you're coming into these communities, you're coming as a learner, not a savior. You're coming with humility, not charity. These aren't people who need to be fixed. They're people who need resources, respect, and in partnership. Can you do that?" "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Absolutely yes. Thank you, Miss Carter. Thank you for seeing past my last name. Call me Jasmine," she said, surprising herself. "And Sarah, what you're doing, choosing differently than your family, speaking truth even when it's uncomfortable, that takes courage. Don't minimize that." The Flint community meeting the following Wednesday filled the recreation center to capacity. 73 residents, ranging from elders who remembered when Flint's auto plants were thriving to young mothers worried about their children's futures in a city that had been systematically betrayed by those in power. Jasmine stood at the front of the room without a podium, without barriers between herself and the people she served. Imoen spoke from the heart about Sterling Industries' vision for the neighborhood. She introduced her team, made sure everyone knew these weren't outsiders coming to impose solutions, but partners coming to listen and collaborate. In the back row, Sarah sat with a notebook, her pen moving constantly, her face reflecting a mix of awe and awakening as she watched Jasmine facilitate a conversation that honored every voice in the room, that treated a 78-year-old grandmother's concerns about her electricity bill with the same weight as a city councilman's questions about infrastructure timelines. After the meeting, as residents lingered over coffee and cookies that Sterling Industries provided, Sarah approached Jasmine with tears streaming down her face. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed in a professional context," she said. "The way you listened, the way you made everyone feel valued, the way you turned a business presentation into a community conversation. I've never seen anything like it. That's because most companies see communities as problems to be solved instead of partners to be respected," Jasmine said gently. "These folks have been lied to and exploited for generations. The least I can do is show up authentically and honor their wisdom about what they need." Over the next month, Sarah became a fixture at Sterling Industries community projects, always in the background, always learning, proving her commitment through consistent presence and genuine humility. She helped organize a job training program for Flint residents, in leveraging her social work connections to bring in resources. She sat with elders and listened to their stories, documenting oral histories that would be preserved as part of the project's community impact record. She worked alongside installation crews, learning the technical side of the work, getting her hands dirty in ways that scandalized her manicured mother when photos inevitably surfaced on social media. It was during this time that Jasmine's phone rang with a call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was strained, older, stripped of the arrogance she remembered from that conference room encounter. "Ms. Carter, this is Richard Whitmore. I need to speak with you about a matter of urgency, not business, something personal, something about my daughter." Jasmine's hand tightened on the phone. "Wait, and if this is about Sarah, I can assure you she's been nothing but professional and respectful in her volunteer work with Sterling Industries. It's not about Sarah exactly, Richard said, his voice cracking in a way that sounded like pride breaking. It's about my son, Trey. He's been arrested for embezzlement and fraud related to the Whitmore development investigation. The evidence is overwhelming. He's going to prison, Ms. Carter. My son is going to prison, and my company is being dismantled by federal prosecutors. And my wife is in the hospital with stress-induced cardiac issues. And the only person in my family who seems to have any moral compass is the daughter I've been ignoring for years because she had the audacity to tell me I was wrong about how I saw the world. Jasmine closed her eyes, processing this information. Whole part of her felt vindicated. Karma had delivered justice more thoroughly than she ever could have orchestrated. But another part, the part shaped by her mother's grace and her father's compassion, felt something unexpected. Not quite sympathy, but a recognition of shared humanity, even in people who tried to diminish hers. Mr. Whitmore, I'm not sure why you're calling me with this information. Because Sarah talks about you constantly, Richard said, his voice raw, about your integrity, your leadership, the way you treat people. She says working with Sterling Industries has taught her more about ethical business in 6 weeks than she learned in 28 years of being a Whitmore. And I realized that the woman I dismissed as not good enough, not established enough, when not the right fit, that woman is everything I raised my children to be, but failed to model myself. Ms. Carter, I'm not calling to ask for anything. I'm calling to apologize, to say that you were right and I was wrong, and my prejudice cost me not just a business opportunity, but a chance to learn from someone extraordinary. I'm calling to say I'm sorry, even though I know that word is inadequate for what I did to you in that meeting. The silence stretched between them, filled with years of history bigger than both of them, systems of oppression and pain that had shaped the moment they'd met and the moment they were in now. Jasmine thought about the easy thing, accepting his apology, ending the call, moving forward with her success as the best revenge. But she thought about Sarah, tears streaming down her face at that community meeting. She thought about her grandmother in Birmingham, who'd found ways to maintain her humanity even when others tried to strip it from her. She thought about the kind of person she wanted to be when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain from extending grace except the knowledge that she'd stayed true to her values. Mr. Whitmore, Jasmine said carefully, I appreciate your apology. I do, but I need you to understand something. What happened in that meeting wasn't just about hurt feelings or a business deal gone wrong. What you and your family did was participate in a pattern of dehumanization that Black people experience every single day in this country. You looked at my credentials, my track record, my proposals, and none of it mattered because you'd already decided who I was based on the color of my skin. Bonnie, that's not just rude. That's the kind of prejudice that keeps systemic inequality in place. So if you're truly sorry, the question isn't whether I forgive you. The question is what you're going to do differently now that you see the harm your worldview caused. You're right, Richard said quietly. You're absolutely right. I don't know what to do, Ms. Carter. I'm 67 years old, and I'm realizing that almost everything I believed about success and merit and how the world works was built on a foundation of lies I told myself to justify my privilege. How do I fix that? How do I make amends for decades of being part of the problem? Jasmine took a deep breath, feeling the weight of this moment. She could wound him now, could twist the knife of his awakening, and feel justified in doing so. Or she could do what she'd been doing her entire career. Show a better way forward, model the change she wanted to see, refuse to let other people's smallness make her small too. You start by listening, Jasmine said. You start by educating yourself about the systems that gave you advantages you didn't earn and created barriers for people who deserve better. You start by using whatever resources and influence you have left to actively dismantle those systems instead of benefiting from them. And maybe if you're serious about this, you start by having an honest conversation with your daughter Sarah about why she's been trying to tell you these truths for years while you refuse to listen. Would you be willing to meet with me? Richard asked. Not for business, not for anything except to help me understand how to be better. Sarah says you're the wisest person she's ever met. I can see why she thinks that. 3 weeks later, on a cold January afternoon, Jasmine found herself back in a conference room with Richard Whitmore. but this time in Sterling Industries' headquarters, on her territory, on her terms. He looked diminished somehow, smaller than his arrogance had made him seem in their first meeting. His silver hair was uncombed, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes carrying the weight of consequences he'd never imagined would reach him. Sarah sat beside him, her hand on his arm, her face anxious but hopeful. "Thank you for agreeing to this," Richard said. "I know you have every reason to tell me to go to hell." "I'm not interested in sending you to hell, Mr. Whitmore," Jasmine said. "I'm interested in building a world where fewer people have to experience what you put me through. So I'm going to tell you some things that will be uncomfortable to hear, and I'm trusting you to sit with that discomfort instead of deflecting or defending. Can you do that?" For 2 hours, Jasmine shared her story, not just the highlight reel of her success, but the painful parts. The teacher who told her engineering was too hard for girls like her. The bank officer who suggested she try applying for a small business loan for a hair salon instead. The investor who said he'd fund her company if she made him a partner and gave him special considerations. The conferences where men assumed she was a secretary. The contracts she lost because clients weren't comfortable with a black woman CEO. The constant, exhausting tax of having to be twice as good to be considered half as competent. And through it all, Richard listened with tears streaming down his face, his worldview cracking open like an egg to reveal the rot inside. "I never saw it," he whispered. "I never saw what my privilege protected me from. I never had to think about race because being white meant I got to be seen as an individual. But I made you represent every stereotype I'd internalized, every prejudice I'd absorbed from my father and his father. I robbed you of your individuality before you even opened your mouth. Miss Carter, how do I live with knowing I've done this? How do I live with knowing I've been this person?" "The same way I live with knowing people like you exist," Jasmine said, not unkindly. "You wake up every day and you make different choices. Watch, you use your discomfort as fuel for change instead of retreating back into the comfort of ignorance. You speak up when you see others perpetuating the same patterns you're learning to unlearn. You financially support organizations fighting for justice. You amplify voices that have been marginalized. You become an active part of the solution instead of a passive participant in the problem. That's how you live with it, Mr. Whitmore. You earn your redemption through action, not words." In the months that followed, Richard Whitmore became an unlikely advocate for change in his industry. He testified against his own son's fraudulent practices in court, providing evidence that strengthened the prosecution's case. He donated his remaining personal wealth to establish a scholarship fund for black engineering students at Michigan State, when naming it after Jasmine's father. He wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about white privilege in the construction industry that went viral and cost him most of his remaining friendships in his old circle, but earned him respect in new ones. He showed up at Sterling Industries' ribbon-cutting ceremonies for completed projects, standing in the back row, applauding without seeking credit or recognition. And Sarah, beautiful Sarah, with her open heart and fierce commitment to justice, became Sterling Industries' Director of Community Relations, using her social work background to deepen the company's impact in every neighborhood they served. She and Jasmine developed a friendship built on mutual respect and shared values, proof that healing was possible even across divides that seemed unbridgeable. On a warm spring morning, and as Jasmine stood at the podium accepting an industry award for Sterling Industries' revolutionary community-centered approach to infrastructure development, she looked out at the audience and saw faces that reflected every part of her journey. Her mother, retired now and beaming with pride. Devin and Maya, her chosen family who'd believed in her vision when it was still taking shape. The Sterling Industries team, diverse and dedicated, and proof that excellence flourished when people were valued for their contributions rather than judged by their skin color. Sarah and Richard Whitmore, sitting together, father and daughter finally finding common ground in their shared commitment to being better. And hundreds of others, community members whose lives had been changed by Sterling's work, industry peers who'd once doubted her, young black girls and boys who saw in her story permission to dream big and take up space and refuse to be diminished. "This award has my name on it," Jasmine said, her voice strong and clear, "but it represents the work of countless people who believe that business could be a force for good in the world. It represents communities that trusted us to partner with them instead of exploit them. It represents the principle that excellence has no color, no gender, no zip code. It simply is. And it flourishes when we create systems that allow everyone to reach their full potential. She paused, her eyes finding Richard Whitmore's in the crowd. It also represents the power of second chances, the possibility of redemption, and the truth that people can change when they're willing to do the hard work of confronting their own prejudices and biases. 9 months ago, I sat in a meeting where I was told I wasn't good enough. Today, I'm standing here with evidence that the only thing that wasn't good enough was the limited imagination of people who couldn't see past their own narrow definitions of excellence. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. As Jasmine left the stage, trophy in hand, she felt her father's presence as clearly as if he were standing beside her. She heard his voice in her memory, the words he'd spoken to her when she was 8 years old and crying because a teacher had been cruel. Baby girl, some people are going to try to make you small your whole life. Your job isn't to fight them or hate them or become like them. Your job is to be so excellently, undeniably yourself that you become living proof of everything they said you couldn't be. That's how you change the world. Not by tearing others down, but by building something so beautiful and true that it makes people want to be better. That evening, Jasmine returned to her office one last time before heading home. On her desk was an envelope with elegant handwriting she recognized as Victoria Whitmore's. She opened it carefully, pulling out a single card embossed with the Whitmore family crest, that symbol of generational wealth and inherited privilege that had once intimidated her. Dear Ms. Carter, the note read, I am writing to you with a humility that does not come naturally to me. My husband has been meeting with you for months now. He's working to understand the harm his prejudices caused and to become a better man. I dismissed his efforts as a midlife crisis until last week, when I attended a lecture he gave at the University of Michigan about systemic racism in business. I saw my husband, a man I thought I knew, confess to 300 students that he'd lived his entire life in the protective bubble of white privilege without recognizing the violence that bubble inflicted on others. He told them about meeting you, about how his own bigotry cost him the opportunity to learn from someone exceptional, about how his daughter Sarah had been right about everything while we'd been wrong. Ms. Carter, I sat in that auditorium and realized I'd been wrong too. About you, about so much. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I haven't earned that. I'm writing to thank you for showing my family what grace looks like, for modeling a kind of leadership my children deserve to learn from, and for being patient with my husband's clumsy but sincere attempts at growth. The world is better because you're in it. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. With deep respect and regret, Victoria Whitmore. Jasmine folded the note carefully, placing it back in the envelope. She thought about how far they'd all come. Richard from arrogance to humility, Victoria from dismissiveness to awareness, Sarah from estrangement to purpose, and herself from that conference room, humiliation to this moment of triumph tempered with compassion. The journey hadn't been about revenge. It had never been about revenge. It had been about proving that excellence transcended prejudice, and that grace was more powerful than bitterness, that choosing to be better instead of bitter was the ultimate victory. She turned off her office lights and headed home to Detroit, to the city that raised her and the community that sustained her, carrying with her the knowledge that she'd done exactly what she set out to do. She'd built something meaningful. She'd changed lives. She'd faced hatred with dignity. She'd met prejudice with excellence. And in doing so, she'd shown everyone watching, especially that little black girl she used to be, crying in her mother's arms about people who tried to make her small, that they were wrong about what she could become. They'd always been wrong. And now the whole world could see it.